Hey everybody, Nick here, and it's time for Shabazz vs. Sebenza, round number 2, my full second review of the Sebenza. Just to recap old events, I previously did own a Sebenza, but not for very long, about 36 hours, and I wasn't really super impressed with it, but a lot of people on the channel have said, Nick, I think you would like that guy, give it another try, let it break in, spend some more time with it. And the viewer Jason actually made the offer. He said, look, if you buy a Sebenza and you don't love it, I'll buy it off you at what you paid. It's a great deal, so I appreciate that very much, Jason. And so it gave me a chance to spend a lot of time with one, to EDC this many, many days, to really get to know the Sebenza a little bit better. And I'm glad I did. And so today I'm going to do my full review of the Chris Reeve Knives Small Sebenza 21. The other difference from the one I had previously is this guy's got micarta inlays, which are supposed to be actually helpful for the ergonomics, and which, in my experience, actually are. But anyway, so there you go. Just to give you a bit of history on the Sebenza here, the Chris Reeve Knives Sebenza is, well, Sebenza is the Zulu word for worker. And Chris Reeve is from South Africa, hence the Zulu, and there's actually a small city outside of Johannesburg called Sebenza. Drove by there this summer, which was entertaining to me. But it's a knife that's been in production since 1990, basically, which is really impressive. That's really long-lived. And so this is a knife with like 26 years of iteration built into it. Absolutely amazing. And very, very, it's a long-standing sort of thing, and it's become sort of a symbol of the high-end in the knife community. So let's do a quick size comparison here. Here is a Shirogorov Neon. Here is a Spyderco Delica, as per tradition. So you can see the cutting edge is a little longer on the Sebenza than the Delica. Here is your Ontario Rat number 2. And Rat number 1, a little bit bigger here. Chris Reeve Tie Lock. One of the very best EDC choices out there. Tie Lock blade is bigger than the Sebenza, but not by all that much. Grimsmo Norseman. And the Spyderco Sleesh Bowie, which I'll be talking about a lot during this review. So there you go. It's a very interesting knife, and I'm looking forward to doing this. So let's go on ahead and jump into the good, the great, the bad, and the ugly of the Chris Reeve Knives Sebenza 21. First off, the size on this guy is great. It's right under 3 inches of blade, which makes it legal pretty much everywhere. And that's a beautiful thing. And it's also, though, there's enough blade here to get pretty much anything done. You're in this range where it's small enough not to attract undue attention, whether it's legal, scared coworkers, but it's also big enough to do any task you conceivably need. So great, great size. Next thing I love about this knife particularly is this blade shape. The Insingo blade by Chris Reeve is a beautiful, beautiful thing. It combines some elements of a sheep's foot sort of blade. This predominantly flat profile. It's not exactly a Warncliffe. It doesn't have that flat edge like on this Razel here. But it does have a fairly flat profile, which is good for many EDC tasks and gives you that really capable tip sort of cut. But it's also still good to go for piercing cuts, like going into a sandbag to open it up, because you've got this little swedge up here. And it's kind of tough to show, but it goes down to almost a point here. It's almost sharp on the top of this. And that means that this knife can slide in for a piercing cut any day of the week, and that's kind of a beautiful thing. They've got a sheep's foot blade here, with very few, if any, of the disadvantages of a sheep's foot blade. That's nice. Good to go. Also, the steel is S35VN, and although it's a little soft generally from Chris Reeve knives, S35VN's a great steel, and in fact Chris Reeve had a handle in it, so it's pretty impressive as in making it. Nice. It's pretty good in the hand in terms of texturing, not necessarily ergonomics. We'll get back there, but this isn't going to go anywhere. You've got the hook of the clip here, you've got all of these various little surfaces here, and the blasting and the micarta on this guy. Keep this guy in your hand. It's not the perfect Vaseline factory knife, but it is a pretty damn nice knife in terms of overall retention. I like that a little bit. The micarta on this guy is great as well. It's not a finished micarta. It's not polished or anything, and if you put a little bit of oil onto them, it turns dark again. And that darkness will go away over time as it, is used and whatnot, but and it'll in fact patina over time. But it's a nice material, and it also fills the hand a lot better than the basic flat Sebenza, because as you can see here, the micarta actually sticks off of the knife a little bit. So it's kind of a beautiful thing. I do like the micarta version a lot more than I like the regular one. That's for sure. The design on this guy is in many ways great because it's very simple and there's not a whole lot of fuss here. There's nothing that can go so wrong. It's a pivot, it's a stop pin, and it's a rear backspacer. That's pretty much it. That makes for very easy disassembly, which I love, because the construction is simple. They give you the tools to do it. It's just using washers. I mean, any idiot can take apart and put back together a Sebenza. And, you can do it in your sleep past a certain point, and that's kind of a beautiful thing. Not that you should be field stripping knives in your sleep. And, that just translates to an overall feeling of trustworthiness. This knife isn't doing a lot. There's nothing terribly fancy here. It's not on fancy bearings. It's not relying on a really precision dent. It's just, it works. And no matter how you've got it adjusted, it just works. So that's kind of a beautiful thing. It's a simple thing done relatively well. There are some nice details here as well. For instance, the blade spine is rounded, which I appreciate very much, right up until it goes into the swedge, which is also a nice little detail. It's got a good little Idaho made and Chris Reeve, which are subtle, these little logos, but they're also there, and they're also nicely done. You've also got the micarta actually bends around the screw holes a little bit. Let's see if I can get that. Yeah. And honestly, that's a beautiful thing, because they could have just done straight lines there, but that's a little bit of a sign that they give a damn. It's a nice little detail. Absolutely. And overall, I mean, every part of this knife is done well. Everything they set out to do, they by and large do right. That's a good sign of good details there. The clip on this guy is also a beautiful thing, to the extent that I actually use the Sebenza clip on my thigh lock. It's a great springy sort of clip. It's got just the right amount of tension, just the right amount of grip. It's a beautiful, beautiful clip. No objections whatsoever to the clip there. The lockup on this guy is absolutely solid. It looks to be someplace in the 30 to 40% range, but whatever it is, there's no lock stick whatsoever, but it's absolutely solid. You can spine whack this guy all day long. Although Chris Reeve would probably judge you for it. Either way, it's a great little lockup on this guy. And then finally, the biggest thing, well, one of the biggest things Chris Reeve Knives has going for it is a really great warranty and service. It's a made in the USA knife. That's good too. But basically, anytime you own a Sebenza, if you screw it up in some way, you can send it back to Chris Reeve. It'll bring it back to new. They charge you some money for it, but it's okay. And their policy even goes so far as if you take it apart and you can't put it back together again, throw the parts in a baggie, ship it to us, and we'll put it back together for a small fee. Beautiful. You can get it reblasted. You can get new blades. They stand behind their products in a way that a lot of companies really don't tend to do. So I appreciate that very much. So that's the good on the small Sebenza here. The size is great. The blade is great. It stays in the hand nicely. The clip is great. The micarta is great. The design is a very simple thing done well. It's got some good details. The lockup is great. And the warranty and the service are really excellent. Let's talk about what is really, really great about this knife. What's beautiful about this knife, and what everybody talks about, is the smoothness. The sensation of closing the blade on this knife is really excellent, as is opening it. It's like taking two pieces of glass that are greased and sliding them against each other. There's resistance every step of the way, but it's a very smooth, consistent resistance. It took a while for that to break in. My first one never quite got there, and at least for this guy, I found that it really improved a lot when I went from the Chris Reeve grease, which is honestly a little bit snotty, a little bit runny, to something a little bit thicker. In my case, I used the nano grease from the nano oil people, which turned out to really be at home here, but I'm sure other kinds of thicker grease would work fine as well. But this knife is incalculably smooth. It's incredibly smooth. That's 100% true. It's worth noting, this is not the same smoothness that I talk about in a knife like the Grimsmo Norseman here, where it's that fall shut, there's practically no friction in the pivot at all. No, that's not the case here. If I try and fall shut this guy, it just sticks. And in fact, I can kind of coerce it home. Come on, you little bugger. But it really takes some effort. You can flick this guy open, but you really need to use a lot of thumb or a lot of wrist to do it. And, again, you're not going to be able to flick this guy shut with any kind of ease. But that's okay. The way this knife opens best is in that very slow, very controlled, sort of smooth motion. That's how it is. And so if you get it on day one and it's not very smooth, maybe try changing the grease, but mostly just open and close it for 3 hours or 4 hours or something like that. I spent 3 episodes of Mad Men just to open, close, open, close, open, close, open, close. And my fiance didn't ask questions. She knows me at this point. But it's a beautiful thing once you do that. And so that's what's great, is that Sebenza smooth quality to it. Let's talk about some of the bad. Okay, first, a couple of nitpicks. I am not a big fan of the blasted handle feeling. It feels a little bit gritty, a little bit dirty, a little bit sandpapery. Just not a huge fan. It's not the end of the world by any stretch, but not a big deal. I don't know, I love it. I much prefer a polished sort of feeling like on the tie lock. I feel like I can get this clean. This guy, I never really do feel like I can. But again, that's just a nitpick. Speaking of nitpicks, I'm not a big fan of the slow deployment on this. That's very much personal taste. But for me, you can flick this guy open with the thumb, but you kind of need some wrist to it. And closing it, you do have to either really give it a strong push, but you need to give it some sort of a consistent motion. As opposed to a knife that's on a flipper where you can, with a nice pivotless, frictionless pivot that is, it's just always going to be a little bit slower to deploy and to put away. It's not a big deal, but it's a point of friction as you just take this guy out of your pocket, make a quick cut into an envelope, stash it away. It's not the end of the world, and it feels nice enough that a little bit of ceremony isn't a big problem, but not to my taste. I'm moving along here. I'm not a big fan of the sharpness of this knife coming out of the box. They have a little card in there. Oh my God, sharpest knife ever. Be careful, caution, you might cut yourself. But practically speaking, I've gotten, Chinese Spydicos that come out of the box sharper than this guy did. It's not the end of the world. A little stropping does it a world of good. But if you're hand finishing this at the high price point, damn it, make it sharp. Just saying. Anyways, now on to some more substantial critiques. I'm not a big fan of the thumb stud. I wasn't before and I still am not. It's a very pyramidal, very pointy sort of affair. It's probably great with gloves, but I don't know. I just don't love it. It doesn't bring me any joy. It's a little sharp. It's a little unpleasant. I'm not convinced that a thumb stud is the best approach for this knife. Imagine this with a front flipper tab stepping up the... Oh, man, that would be a beautiful thing. Anyways, I digress and dream. But the thumb studs are just not great in the hand, and they're also, this guy is in the slicing path, which is not great. And for a lot of people, they want two thumb studs, one on each side, and this is not going to give you that. Not the end of the world. You can get one that's made to order that way, but still. There you go. Next issue for me is the ergonomics on the whole. This knife is a knife that has one decent way to handle it for me. Your index finger needs to go here. The rest of it needs to go here. The pocket clip, this little tab needs to go into this little hole here, but if it doesn't exactly, it's not super comfortable. I mean, this knife is okay in the hand, I guess. At least for my hands, but it's not an ergonomic knife. I mean, compared to a knife that's designed with ergonomics in mind, like this little Spyderco Dragonfly, it's absolutely night and day. I can hold this knife, but I don't love it. And so, I mean, it's better than the Inkosi in terms of ergonomics, but I don't love it. The ergonomics are just not very good. That's Chris Reeve's weak spot, always, in pretty much all of the designs. Then finally, for me personally, a little bit annoying is I love this Insingo blade shape, but you're very, very limited in terms of your options that you can get with it. I believe you can get carbon fiber, but not the carbon fiber inlays, just the carbon fiber scale through one distributor. You can get this micarta and you can get plain. Yet they have so many different options. You can get, Sebenzas with a rosewood inlays, a nice polished titanium, and you can get lefty and righty. This is a knife that's really begging for some kind of a build-to-order sort of option, because the Sebenza that I would want isn't something they sell. I'd want the Insingo blade with a nice wooden inlay with a smoother titanium, and a blue thumb stud, and they're not doing that. So, I don't know. I feel like at the price they're charging, they should allow you to customize your order a little bit more than they do right now, rather than just having prepackaged ones that you can buy. So there's your bad. There are a couple of details that I'm not in love with. The slow deployment, the blasting, the sharpness. But there are more substantial issues. The thumb studs are not comfortable. The ergonomics are not terribly comfortable either. And depending on what you actually want in the Sebenza, although they got lots of options, often the one you want isn't going to be available. Let's talk about the ugly. The ugly thing here is the price. In my first review, I said something along the lines of the Sebenza is more marketing than knife making. I now disagree with myself. Having let it broken in and having handled a lot more knives, I see that there is good knife making here. But the price for the Sebenza, that is more marketing than knife making. Because $425 is a lot of money here. I mean, seriously, if any other American company, even on the high end, released a production 3-inch non-flipper frame lock on washers made in the US of A, at $425, even this exact knife, I feel like a lot of people would just laugh them out of the blade show. That's really, really high, even with the same warranty. And it just doesn't compare very well to a lot of what else is out there. For instance, one of my favorite knives is the Spyderco Bowie. This is a knife that compares in many ways to the Sebenza. It's a little bit bigger. It's also titanium. In some ways, the manufacturing is a little nicer, at least to my personal taste. But regardless, even though the Sebenza's got an edge in steel, this is not $125 better than the Sebenza, and at least to my personal taste, the Bowie wins by a mile. I'd recommend this guy over the Sebenza every day of the week. But that's, again, taste. Another good example is the Olamic Wayfarer 247. Olamic is a great American company, and it's an incredible flipper knife, and it's perfect in the same way that the Sebenza has really got a lot of solidity, it's just really well done. The Olamic is that same thing. And that's a flipper, it's a bigger knife, it's a newer steel, and it's still $50 cheaper than the Sebenza. And the Umnumzan, the Chris Reeve Knives Umnumzan, which is a solid freaking gem. It's a bigger knife. It's got more uniqueness to it. It's got a whole bunch more features. It's a better knife, in my personal opinion. And it's the same price as this little guy. This price, even compared to other Chris Reeve Knives offerings, is a little bit crazy. And if you're into a Chris Reeve this deep, just buy the damn Tylock, which is one of the very best everyday carry knives out there, and goes for $50 more than this retail. So I just don't see this price whatsoever. It's just not competitive at this price. And so that's the ugly thing to me, is that this is not a $425 knife for any reason except marketing, which is, the history. The fact that Chris Reeve designed the integral lock, that's all great. But at the end of the day, if you've got money and you want a knife, the value, to me, just isn't there. So let's go into the final conclusion. Look, there is no questioning the fact that the Chris Reeve Knives Sebenza 21 is an important knife. It's an important piece of knife-making history. The Reeve integral lock that everybody else is using kind of started here. And it was on top of the game for a long time with good reason. It is a damn good design in a lot of ways, particularly with some of the more modern innovations, like the Insingo blade, the micarta, things like that. Even if it's not perfect, it's still a solid knife. And I think that every serious knife guy needs to handle the Sebenza at some point just to calibrate the sense of the smoothness, to get a sense of really good knife making. I didn't say own, just handle. But I think this is also an example of where standing still can put you towards the back of the pack. At the front of earlier on in its lifetime, the Sebenza was the top of the line. No one was touching the build quality, the smoothness, the precision. And so I think Chris Reeve just kind of realized, you know what, we got something good here. It's working, so let's not dick with it. They made little incremental changes, which are helpful, and they've made more incremental changes in some of the newer models, like the Incosis, but nonetheless, they didn't fix what was broken, and so they just adjusted the price to match the times and kept it largely what it is. But the thing is, the competition has really grown. You now get knives that are having very similar precision in machining. Actually, even, heck, I think the Bowie's about in the same league in terms of machining. You get knives that are adding in additional features, like flippers, or running on bearings, which is not for everybody, but is a nice little thing. You get knives with a better ergonomic focus, that are really designed for the hand, and you get knives that are just more interesting, honestly, more unique, more interesting, like the Umnumzan or the Tylock from Chris Reeve Knives. And so, the Sebenza has stayed still, and everything else has sped up. And so, as a result, I think the Sebenza is now, certainly when you consider value, getting towards the back of the pack. All of those knives that are beating it are getting to be cheaper. And so you can get a Bowie for $125 less that's, in my personal opinion, better. Or a Wayfarer 247 that has the same build quality overall, but more interesting new features and a more unique design. It's kind of it's a staple, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's perfection. It's the top of the game. And unfortunately, I think for the new people in the knife community, it's sort of everybody's first grail. The Sebenza is sort of like the Rolex Submariner of the knife game. Everybody who gets into watches goes through this stage where first they love Rolex, oh my god, it's incredible. Then they hate Rolex because it's so cliche. And then they love Rolex again because they respect, that they're doing really good stuff. And so I think the Sebenza is a lot like that. When you first get in, you're like, oh my god, that's a perfect grail. Oh my, it's incredible. That's the high end right there. And then after a while, and that's kind of where I was when I wrote my first review. Like, oh, what the heck is anybody going for? It's not knife making. And, you're not a big fan of it because of that. And then then you remember that even though you're paying a huge price for it, and even though it's a little bit cliche, the Sebenza, and the Submariner for that matter, got to that position by being really excellent. I mean, this is a very excellent knife. But the thing is, it's not the only excellent knife, and so I guess my final conclusion is that if you want a Sebenza, you should get a Sebenza. If you want that history, if you want all the good, and if you want to own a piece of what has made modern knife making, then great. Buy a Sebenza, no problem. Buy it used if you can, to avoid taking a bath, or just pay the price, know that you're getting a little bit ripped off, but you'll still be okay with it. On the other hand, though, if you're just after a high-end knife, if you're coming into the hobby, and you want something that's going to be great, it's going to be high-end, it's going to be excellent, this is not where you need to go to start. I mean, it's high-end, it's great, it's excellent, but you can get a Sleesh Bowie. You can get a Wayfarer. You can get a Tylock if you go a little more expensive. You can get an Umnumzon around the same price range. I mean, there are so many really good, equivalently, or in my opinion, better knives out there in the same price bracket that I think if you limit yourself to the Sebenza, you're going to have a bad time. So, the Sebenza is a great knife. It's definitely good knife making. I take that part back. But it's also not the apex of the high end. Very few people would argue that, but even in the production game, it's no longer the tip of the spear. There's a lot of good here, but it's not perfection. And it's not something, personally, that I find so unique and compelling. There are knives that I personally much prefer, and as such, I'm going to take my buddy Jason up on his offer and sell this guy back to him. So, anyways, I guess that's my conclusion. The Sebenza is an important piece of knife-making history, and it's a very good knife. But unless you want an important piece of knife-making history, you may not need this very good knife, and you're probably going to get a better value if you go to another really, really good high-end sort of knife. Hope this has been interesting to you, and there you go, Shabazz versus Sebenza, round 2. In many ways, the same conclusion, just a whole lot more hot air, and a whole lot more thinking, I suppose. Hope this has been interesting to you. Have yourselves an absolutely wonderful rest of the day, and if you do buy one, I hope it's a good worker for you. Bye now.